Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're setting up a bit of a detective story. We're going to trace common driver safety issues all the way back to their true operational roots. Often when things go wrong out there on the road, it is so easy to just look at the very end of the chain. But what happens when the clues actually point right back to the beginning? Okay, let's dive into this.
I want you to just imagine for a second that you're right there in the cab on a totally normal, messy day. You've got a driver who's been stuck at a receiver for nearly 6 hours. His hours of service clock? It's burning down. But the freight? Yeah, it's not moving. And meanwhile, dispatch is pinging him for an ETA on his next pickup. The planner is stressing out about tomorrow's schedule, and the customer is acting like detention time is just an acceptable part of the job. So by the time that trailer is finally empty, the driver's left with almost zero time on the clock, absolutely no parking in sight, and a desperate need to find a safe place to rest.
It's a complete domino effect. First, the shipper loads late. That means the receiver burns through the driver's clock. Then, dispatch steps in and demands the next ETA. And finally, the driver is left scrambling, trying to find parking. This whole sequence perfectly illustrates how operational pressure, decisions made far, far outside the cab, forces the driver into a tremendously tight corner. The driver is literally just the last person in the chain left holding a bad plan.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question. When the law gets messy, who usually gets the blame? Think about it. Operations says, well, that's just how the lane runs. Safety says the driver should have managed their hours better. The driver, obviously, gets frustrated because the clock doesn't match real life. And almost inevitably, someone in the room points a finger at the ELD as if that little plastic box itself conspired against them, complaining about its constant beeping and flagging.
But here's the reality we all need to accept. The ELD is not the problem. It is simply the impartial witness. See, it's incredibly easy to blame the ELD because, well, it's the visible thing, right? It beeps, it generates reports, it leaves violations just sitting there for somebody to deal with. But the ELD isn't creating the chaos. It's just sitting there quietly, holding the receipt for what actually happened. Let's take a look at what that receipt actually contains. It's basically a trail of digital breadcrumbs. It captures everything from movement and duty status to edits, gaps, and yard moves. It records the exact shape of the day before everyone else starts spinning their own explanations. I mean, an ELD captures hundreds of data points every single hour. It doesn't know if the customer was slow or if parking was totally gone. It just shows enough hard data to make people start asking much, much better questions.
Let's examine our first major piece of evidence here, personal conveyance, or PC. PC is often treated as a pressure valve on a really bad day. If a driver is truly relieved from work and just moving to the first reasonably available safe place to rest after a massive delay, using PC totally makes sense. One move like that? Absolutely fine. But when it becomes a frequent occurrence just to salvage a bad dispatch plan, well, that reveals a much deeper systemic issue.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the massive contrast between surface explanations and systemic reality. You might see a thin excuse in the ELD nodes that just says parking or no parking. But when you actually dig deeper, the systemic reality often reveals the move was really to advance the load, reposition the truck for dispatch, or accommodate a ridiculously tight appointment window. This forces us to look right past the log entry and ask a really tough question. Was the driver actually choosing where to rest, or were they secretly being nudged into tomorrow's operation? If a driver is bypassing perfectly good available parking just to get closer to the next shipper because dispatch wants them in position, that is no longer a personal move for rest. No way! That is the carrier's business plan masquerading as a log note. And that leads us directly to our next vital piece of investigative evidence. You've got to ask yourself, who moved the truck and why? This specific question is the ultimate pivot point into understanding unassigned driving time.
Unassigned time often gets treated like mere administrative clutter, right? Just something to clean up on the dashboard. But whether it's shop staff moving equipment, the wrong driver logged in, or repeated terminal-level chaos, a pattern of unexplained movement is a massive red flag. It tells outside reviewers that your recorded operation simply does not match your real-world operation.
Let's talk about log edits for a second. A log edit is not a magic eraser. Vague notes like fixed, correction, or driver error might have made sense in the heat of the moment, but 3 months later, during a crash investigation or a safety audit, they look incredibly suspicious. What you actually need is clear context. You don't need to write a novel, but a reasonable person should be able to read that note and understand exactly what went wrong.
The ultimate takeaway here is pretty simple. Clearing the dashboard is definitely not the same as understanding the problem. Just because someone went in, approved a bunch of edits, and assigned all the unassigned time so the red alerts disappear, doesn't mean your operations are actually under control. It just means you hid the symptoms.
So, the crucial point is this realization right here. Dispatch is part of the safety system. You simply cannot claim you are managing hours of service risks if the log department is the only place those hours are being managed. Safety is directly, intimately tied to the company's operational blueprint.
Let's break down exactly how that operational blueprint dictates safety. It's a direct chain reaction. Dispatch pressure pushes an exhausted driver's clock. Poor planning results in completely unrealistic appointments. Unyielding customers force detention, which creates this frantic last-minute scramble. And a messy guard process, well, that causes unassigned driving moves. It's incredibly clear that non-driver elements are very often driving the safety outcomes.
We really need carriers to get truly honest with their data. If several drivers have the exact same problem on one specific lane, is it a driver issue or is it a lane issue? The answer is pretty obvious. Repeated issues point to a bad plan, an impossible customer, or relentless dispatch pressure. It absolutely does not point to an incompetent driver.
And you need to figure this out fast. You have to look at your patterns before an auditor, lawyer, or reviewer does. Remember, people inside the company, they remember the chaos of the day, right? The late customer, the broken truck, the frantic phone calls. But outside reviewers, they don't see the chaos. All they see are the records.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when those outside reviewers finally look at ELD records. They are hunting for very specific things: movement without a driver, vague notes, edits made after the fact. They are tracking repeated problems. But most dangerously, they are looking for carrier awareness without action. A bad record is one thing, but a bad record that a company saw over and over again without changing their operations, that is a disastrous audit waiting to happen.
Ultimately, we have to recognize the ELD for what it really is. It does not replace judgment. It gives judgment something to work with. It's merely a tool. It exposes the operational reality. But it is entirely up to management to exercise judgment and actually change the underlying conditions, the bad lanes, the slow customers, the dispatch pressure that are causing all this friction in the first place.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought straight from our source material. What do your ELD records say about how your company actually operates? Don't just ask if your drivers know how to use the device. Look deeper. Does your data point to a dispatch problem, a customer problem? If a reviewer looked at your logs today, what story would they read about your culture? It's time to stop explaining the same problems and start changing the conditions that create them. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.